The coffee was still burning my feet when I realized I'd just lost my son, not to death to truth. He stood in our kitchen doorway, face glowing with pride, and said 10 words that detonated 17 years of silence. Mom, my new internship supervisor is Gerald Aiken. The mug I'd been holding, the lopsided one William made in 8th grade, slipped from my fingers, and in the 2 seconds it took to shatter, I watched my carefully built life crack along with it. Because Gerald Aiken, billionaire tech CEO, had no idea he had a son. But he was about to find out. The coffee mug was handmade, one of those imperfect ceramic pieces William had crafted in 8th grade art class, lopsided and too heavy on one side. I'd kept it all these years, because it was his. Every morning, when I wrapped my hands around it, I was holding something he'd created with his own fingers. It shattered when it hit the floor. I stood there, barefoot, warmth spreading across my toes, staring at my son's face while my brain scrambled to catch up with what my ears had just heard. Mom, my new internship supervisor is Gerald Aiken. Now pay close attention to what happens next. Because this moment, this exact second, is when 17 years of carefully constructed silence began to crack. William was still glowing with that shy, cautious pride that only comes when you're 17 and you've just accomplished something you weren't sure you deserved. His backpack hung off one shoulder. His hair needed cutting. He had a smudge of graphite on his thumb from the sketches he'd been working on during the bus ride home. He looked so much like his father in that moment that I nearly choked. Mom? His smile flickered. You okay? I forced air into my lungs. Forced my mouth to work. That's amazing, honey. The words came out strangled, unconvincing. But William was too excited to notice. And here's where it gets important, because what my son didn't know was about to collide with what I'd been hiding. Out of 2 million applicants, Mom. 2 million, and they picked 10. I'm one of 10. He dropped his backpack, pacing the kitchen the way he always did when his mind was racing. The acceptance email came through an hour ago. Orientation is next Monday. They're assigning us to departments based on our interests, and apparently Mr. Aiken personally reviews every intern's initial project proposal. My heart was a fist squeezing tighter with every word. Gerald Aiken, billionaire, tech empire ruler, a man whose face graced magazine covers and investor conferences, a man who commanded boardrooms the way kings once commanded armies, and the man who had no idea he had a son, but I had no idea what was waiting for me. Remember this moment, you'll understand why in just a few minutes. William kept talking, pulling up the email on his phone, reading sections aloud about innovation labs and mentorship programs, and exclusive access to product development teams. His voice buzzed around me like static. I was nodding, smiling, making the right sounds. But inside, I was 17 years in the past, standing in a cramped bathroom, staring at 2 pink lines, trying to figure out how to tell the man I loved that our future had just shifted. I never got the chance. They even provide housing stipends for interns who need them, William was saying. Not that we do, but still. And the program director said, Mr. Aiken believes in investing in young minds before they. William. My voice came out sharper than I intended. He stopped mid-sentence, blinking at me. I softened, tried to pull myself together. That's wonderful. Really. I'm so proud of you. His shoulders relaxed. That brilliant, cautious smile returned. Thanks, Mom. I know it's competitive, but I really think I can learn a lot. And who knows? Maybe it'll open doors for, does Mr. Aiken interact with the interns directly? The question escaped before I could stop it. William shrugged. The email said he does occasional site visits and reviews final projects. Why? I bent down, gathering the broken pieces of the mug. My hands were shaking. Just curious. You know how some CEOs are all talk and no involvement? Not him, apparently. Everyone says he's hands-on, intense, but fair. William crouched beside me, picking up the largest shard. Sorry about your mug. It's fine. It wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. Because here's what William didn't know, and here's what you need to understand about what's coming. Nearly 17 years ago, I met Gerald Aiken when he was still hungry, still real, when his empire was just blueprints and borrowed capital and a brilliance so sharp it could cut through steel. I was 24, working as an administrative assistant for a consulting firm, managing one of his early projects. He was 27 and dangerous in the way only ambitious men can be, like standing too close to a live wire. He saw me. Not just looked, saw me, like I mattered, like I was more than the woman who organized his meeting schedules and brought him coffee at midnight when deadlines loomed. For 6 months, I believed I belonged in his world. For 6 months, I thought I could keep up with a man who wanted to own the future. I was wrong. The night he received his first major funding offer, $8 million from a Silicon Valley venture capital firm, I found out I was pregnant. I'd taken the test that morning in a gas station bathroom, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. 2 pink lines, clear as judgment. I tried to tell him that night. We were on his balcony, the new apartment, with the view he'd been dreaming about. I had the pregnancy test in my jacket pocket. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Gerald, I need to tell you something that can't wait." He kissed my forehead without looking at me. Phone pressed to his ear. "Hold that thought, babe. Tokyo's on the line." I stood there for 40 minutes while he negotiated terms with people whose names I didn't recognize, watched him pace and gesture and build a future in a language I couldn't speak. When he finally hung up, his eyes were electric. "Carmen, this is it. This is everything." I reached into my pocket, felt the plastic test, warm from my body heat. "What's that?" he asked, already glancing at his laptop where another email had just arrived. I looked at his face, brilliant, hungry, already half gone to a world I couldn't follow him into, and realized something that broke me. Telling him wouldn't change anything. He'd already chosen, and it wasn't us. I shoved the test deeper into my pocket. "Nothing, just congratulating you." He pulled me into a distracted hug, already reading over my shoulder. And I knew I'd just made a decision that would define the next 17 years. I left 3 days later while he was in California. Didn't leave a note. Just disappeared into a city designed for people who needed to vanish. By the time he returned 3 weeks later, he was different. Sharper, colder. Already half consumed by the world that would eventually crown him king. He talked about pivots and scalability and market disruption. His sentences moved faster than I could follow. His eyes looked through me instead of at me. I tried again, one last time. We were sitting in his new apartment, the one the investors had helped him lease, all glass and steel and views that made you feel like you were floating. I'd rehearsed the words 100 times. "Gerald, I have something to tell you." He was on his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Can it wait, Carmen? I've got a presentation in 6 hours and the deck isn't. I'm pregnant." The words finally broke free. Quiet. Desperate. He didn't hear me. Or maybe he did, and his brain refused to process anything that didn't fit into his blueprint for the future. Either way, he kept typing, kept talking about investor expectations and product launches, and everything except the life we'd created together. Let that sink in for a moment. I left that night, packed my things while he was in the shower, left a note that said nothing important, disappeared into a city of 8 million people, and convinced myself I was doing him a favor. He didn't need a family, he needed an empire. And I needed to raise a child who wouldn't grow up feeling like an inconvenience to a man who dreamed bigger than fatherhood. That was 17 years ago. 17 years of silence. Of building a life around the absence of the man whose eyes my son inherited. Of answering William's questions about his father with carefully constructed vagueness. He was ambitious. We wanted different things. It's complicated. I thought I protected him. I thought I'd protected both of them. Now, standing in my kitchen with broken ceramic cutting into my palm and my son's excited chatter filling the air, I realized I'd only delayed the inevitable. William was going to walk into Gerald Aiken's world. And Gerald was going to see himself staring back. "Mom?" William was watching me with concern now. "You sure you're okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. Dropped the broken pieces into the trash. "I'm fine, honey. Just surprised. It's a big deal." He grinned, relief washing over his face. "It really is, isn't it?" I watched him head to his room, already pulling out his laptop to research the company, and felt the walls I'd built around our quiet life begin to crack. Because here's what I knew with absolute certainty. Gerald Aiken was brilliant, observant, the kind of man who noticed details other people missed. And William, my beautiful, brilliant boy, had his father's eyes, his father's hands, his father's way of tilting his head when he was thinking. How long before Gerald noticed? How long before my 17 years of silence came crashing down? And this was just the beginning. I cleaned up the spilled coffee, hands still trembling, and whispered into the empty kitchen. Please, please don't recognize him. But deep down, I already knew. The universe doesn't hand out mercy to women who've been running from the truth. It hands out reckonings. And mine had just been delivered by a 10-word sentence from the son, who had no idea he was about to meet the father who never knew he existed. The days between that Tuesday and Monday morning moved like sludge and lightning all at once. I spent them pretending, smiling when William showed me his research on Aiken innovations, nodding when he talked about the innovation labs and the breakthrough projects, and the man who'd built an empire from borrowed capital and raw brilliance. I watched my son's face light up with the same hunger I'd once seen in his father's eyes, and I felt something tear inside my chest. Sunday night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios like a woman trying to choose which disaster would hurt least. Maybe Gerald wouldn't be there. Maybe he was traveling. Billionaires traveled constantly, didn't they? Maybe the orientation would be run by some department head, and William would blend into the group of 10 brilliant strangers, and Gerald would never need to look twice. Maybe the universe would show mercy. Monday evening, William came home pale. Not sick pale, not tired pale. The kind of pale that happens when your world tilts sideways and you're still trying to find your balance. He dropped his bag by the door, something he never did, and stood in the entryway like he'd forgotten how to move forward. Now here's what you need to understand about what happened next. Honey? My voice came out steadier than my hands felt. How was it? He looked at me. Really looked at me. The way he used to when he was small, and trying to figure out if I was telling him the truth about monsters not being real. It was intense. I guided him to the couch, made him tea he didn't drink, waited while he gathered words that seemed too heavy for his tongue. The office is nothing like I imagined, he finally said. I mean, I've seen pictures, but being inside it. He shook his head. Everything's glass and white stone, and these views that make you feel like you're floating above the city. The other interns, they're all brilliant, Mom. Like genuinely intimidating. One girl already has 2 patents. A guy from MIT who built a solar panel prototype that's 40% more efficient than anything on the market. I made myself smile. You belong there just as much as they do. That's what Mr. Aiken said. My blood stopped moving. He spoke to you? Yeah. William's voice dropped. That's the part I can't stop thinking about. He told me the rest in pieces. Fragments I had to assemble like broken glass. The orientation had been standard at first: company history, facility tour, program expectations. 10 interns moving through spaces that hummed with the kind of innovation that changed industries. William described server rooms that looked like art installations. Prototype labs where engineers spoke in acronyms that sounded like incantations. Conference rooms with walls that became screens at the touch of a hand. I listened and mentally painted myself into those spaces. 24-year-old Carmen, in her clearance rack blazer, trying to look like she belonged among people who wore confidence, like tailored suits. I'd walked those halls once, felt the weight of not quite fitting, of being support staff in a world built for visionaries. I never belonged there. And now, my son did. But what happened next would change everything. We were in the main conference room, William continued. The program director was explaining the mentorship structure when the door opened and he walked in. William's voice changed, quieter, almost reverent. Gerald Aiken, in person, not on a screen or in a magazine, actually there. He described him the way I remembered him. Tall, commanding presence, eyes that seemed to calculate 1,000 variables in the space of a glance. Wearing a dark sweater instead of a suit, the kind of casual that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Moving through the room like he owned not just the building but the air inside it. He welcomed us personally, William said. Talked about innovation requiring courage. About how the best ideas come from people who haven't learned to be afraid yet. He paused. He has this way of speaking that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. I knew that feeling. God, I knew it. And then he looked right at me. My chest tightened. It wasn't like he was looking at the others. It was different, longer, like he was trying to place me or figure something out. William's hands moved restlessly. After the welcome speech, he asked to speak with me privately. The room tilted. He asked you. To his office. Just me. William rubbed his face. I thought maybe I'd done something wrong during the application process. Or maybe he'd changed his mind about my acceptance. But that wasn't what happened. What happened was this, and you're going to want to hear this. Gerald's office on the 42nd floor. Glass walls overlooking a city that looked like scattered diamonds in afternoon light. A desk that was somehow both minimal and imposing. 2 chairs that probably cost more than my car. And Gerald Aiken standing by the window, studying William the way scientists study specimens under microscopes. He asked about my background, William said. Where I grew up, what got me interested in technology, my design portfolio. He swallowed. Then he asked about my family. Every muscle in my body locked. I told him it was just you and me. That you raised me alone. That you worked as a medical transcriptionist to put food on the table and still somehow made sure I had everything I needed. Tears burned behind my eyes, pride and terror in equal measure. And then he got quiet. Like really quiet, just staring at me with this expression I couldn't read. William's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Then he asked my last name. I stopped breathing. I told him Reyes, your last name, and Mom. William looked at me with confusion still etched across his face. He asked me to repeat it. Like he didn't hear me the first time, but the room was completely silent. There was no way he didn't hear. He asked my last name, twice. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples I couldn't control. Because here's what William didn't understand, and here's the part nobody talks about. Gerald Aiken's mind worked like precision machinery. He didn't forget names, didn't mishear simple words. If he asked twice, it was because his brain was processing, calculating, connecting dots that shouldn't connect. Looking at my son's face and seeing something that made him pause. Did he say anything else? My voice barely worked. He asked how old I was, when my birthday was. William tilted his head exactly the way Gerald used to when something didn't add up. It felt weird, personal. Like he was trying to figure out some equation. Because he was. Oh God, he was. I could see it playing out. Gerald's brilliant, relentless mind doing math. William's age. My last name, the one he would have known from HR records 17 years ago. The eyes staring back at him that looked too familiar. The timeline that added up to something he never expected. What did you tell him? The truth. That I'm 17, that my birthday's in October. William's expression shifted. Why are you asking like that? Like what? Like you're scared of the answer. I wasn't ready for this. Wasn't prepared for the conversation that should have happened years ago, when the questions were simpler and the stakes weren't sitting in Gerald Aiken's glass office putting pieces together. I'm not scared, I lied. Just curious. But I was terrified. Something didn't add up, and he was about to find out why. Because 17 years ago, I'd tried to tell him, tried to make him hear words that would have changed everything. I remembered those attempts now with razor clarity. The first time, we were in his cramped apartment, before the investors, before the empire. He was working on code that would eventually become the foundation of his first major breakthrough. I'd made dinner, cheap pasta, and cheaper wine. We were sitting on his couch that sagged in the middle, and he was showing me projections that looked like fever dreams, talking about markets that didn't exist yet. I have something to tell you, I'd said. He kissed me instead, pulled me close. Tell me after. I want to show you something first. The something was 3 hours of explaining technology I didn't understand, his eyes bright with possibilities I couldn't imagine. By the time he finished, it was 2 a.m., and he'd fallen asleep with his laptop still balanced on his knees. I never told him. The second time was worse. The night of the funding offer, $8 million. Validation of everything he'd been building. He was electric with it pacing, talking too fast, making calls to people whose names I didn't recognize. I followed him around his new apartment, waiting for a break in the momentum. Gerald, I need to tell you something important. Important can wait, Carmen. This changes everything. It's about us. He wasn't listening, not really. His phone rang again. Another investor. Another door opening. I watched him walk onto the balcony, gesturing wildly while making promises to people who were betting millions on his vision. And I realized something devastating. I didn't exist in the future he was building. There was no room for me in the empire taking shape in his mind. When he finally came back inside, I tried one last time. I'm pregnant. The words came out quiet, Desperate. Final. He was already at his computer, pulling up something one of the investors had sent. "That's great, babe," he murmured, distracted. "I'm really glad. Wait, did you say the Johnson proposal or the Richardson contract?" He hadn't heard me. Or his brain had filtered out anything that didn't fit into the blueprint for the future he was engineering. I left that night, packed while he slept, left a note that said, "I'm sorry," and nothing else. Disappeared into a city designed for people to vanish in. And I convinced myself I'd done the right thing. Now, sitting across from my 17-year-old son while he described Gerald staring too long and asking too many questions, I wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. "Mom," William's voice pulled me back. "You're shaking." I looked down. My hands were trembling in my lap. "I'm fine. Just tired." "You're lying." We stared at each other. My brilliant boy, who'd inherited his father's ability to see through smokescreens. "It's complicated," I finally said. "Then uncomplicate it." But I couldn't. Not yet. Not with him looking at me like I was still the person who had all the answers. Not when telling the truth meant watching his entire understanding of his life reshape itself into something unfamiliar. "Give me time," I whispered. He studied me for a long moment. Then nodded. "Okay. But Mom, there's something you should know." My stomach dropped. Mr. Aiken said, I remind him of someone. He wouldn't say who, but the way he looked at me. William's voice trailed off. "I think he's trying to figure it out." Of course he was. Because Gerald Aiken didn't leave equations unsolved, didn't let mysteries sit unanswered. He would dig, research, calculate, and eventually he'd arrive at the truth I'd been hiding for 17 years. That night, after William finally went to bed, I stood in his doorway watching him sleep. The lamp from the hallway cast shadows across his face, highlighting the straight nose that wasn't mine, the strong jawline I'd never had, the way his brow furrowed even in sleep like he was solving problems in his dreams. I saw Gerald in every angle, and I knew with crushing certainty that I was running out of time. The question wasn't whether Gerald would figure it out. The question was whether I'd tell William the truth before his father put all the pieces together. And that decision? It was about to be taken out of my hands. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed running calculations I'd avoided for 17 years. How long before Gerald connected every dot? How long before my silence became the lie William would never forgive? The numbers kept changing. Days, hours, minutes. By 6 a.m., I gave up pretending rest was possible. I showered in water too hot, dressed in the dark blue scrubs I wore for my morning shift at the community clinic, and moved through the house like I was walking through someone else's life. William's door was still closed. He had the day off before his second week at Aiken Innovations started. I was grateful I couldn't face him yet, couldn't look into eyes that belonged to a man who was probably awake in some penthouse right now, doing the same math I was doing. I grabbed my keys, my bag, stepped onto the front porch, into morning air that tasted like rain, and froze. A black town car sat at the curb. Sleek. Expensive. Wrong for this neighborhood where most people drove 10-year-old sedans with dented bumpers and fading paint. The back door opened. Gerald stepped out. If you've ever had your past show up uninvited, you know this feeling. That moment when everything you've been running from finds you anyway. If this story is hitting close to home, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next? You're going to want to see how this plays out, trust me. Time collapsed. 17 years vanished. I was 24 again, standing in his cramped apartment, watching him move with that same controlled grace, like a man who'd learned to command space without trying. He wore dark jeans and a gray sweater. No tie, no armor of tailored suits. Just the face I used to trace with my fingers and the eyes that once made me believe I mattered. Those eyes locked on mine. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Carmen. My name and his voice felt like touching a scar I'd convinced myself had healed. "What are you doing here?" The words came out steadier than my heartbeat. He took 3 steps forward, stopped at the edge of my driveway like there was an invisible line he wasn't sure he had permission to cross. "I need to talk to you. I have work. This can't wait." We stared at each other. The morning stretched between us, full of everything unsaid, everything buried, everything about to detonate. 5 minutes, I finally said. He exhaled like I'd granted him clemency. I didn't invite him inside. couldn't bear the thought of him standing in my living room, seeing the life I'd built in his absence. Instead, we stood on opposite sides of the driveway, while the sun crept higher and neighbors' sprinklers clicked on, and somewhere down the street, a dog barked at nothing. Gerald spoke first. "William," his voice cracked on the name, "the intern. The one I met Monday." My spine turned to iron. "What about him?" "He looks like me, Carmen." 4 words. Quiet. Devastating. True. I wanted to lie. Wanted to laugh it off as coincidence or imagination, or the kind of pattern recognition that makes people see faces in clouds. But my throat closed around every denial I'd rehearsed, and the silence that followed told him everything. His expression shifted confusion, giving way to something raw and unbearable. "How old is he?" "Gerald." "How old?" 17. The number hung in the air like an accusation. He did the math. I watched him do it, watched his brilliant mind calculate backward from October birthdays and first day of internship dates to a night nearly 17 years ago when we were still young and reckless and convinced we had time. His face went pale. "October," he whispered. He said his birthday was in October. I couldn't look at him anymore. Stared at the cracks in my driveway instead. Counted them. 7 major fractures, spreading like fault lines. "Carmen," his voice broke. "Is William mine?" The question I'd avoided for 17 years. The question I'd convinced myself I'd never have to answer. Yes. The word escaped before I could cage it. Small, irrevocable, true. Gerald staggered backward like I'd shoved him. His hand found the hood of his car, gripping it like the only solid thing in a world that had just shifted beneath his feet. 17 years. He was breathing too fast. "You've had my son for 17 years, and you weren't listening." The words ripped out of me. "I tried to tell you, twice, 3 times. But you were too busy building your empire to hear anything that didn't fit into your blueprint for the future. That's not, you left for California without looking back. When you came home, you talked about pivots and scalability and investors who believed in your vision. There was no room in that vision for a pregnant girlfriend who worked in admin." His jaw clenched. "You could have called, sent an email, a text, and said what? Congratulations on your funding. By the way, you're going to be a father?" My laugh came out sharp, bitter. "You would have seen it as a trap, an obligation. Something keeping you from the future you were building. You don't know what I would have." "Yes, I do." My voice dropped. "Because I saw your face that night. When you got the funding offer. You looked at me like I was already part of the past you were leaving behind." The truth settled between us like ash after a fire. Gerald's hands shook. I'd never seen him shake before. Never seen him lose the composure that made boardrooms bend to his will. "I had a right to know," he said quietly. "And I had a right to protect my son from feeling like an inconvenience to a man who wanted the world more than he wanted us." "So you just disappeared? Raised him alone? Let him grow up thinking his father didn't want him?" The accusation landed like a blade. "I let him grow up feeling wanted," I shot back. "Loved. Enough. Everything you would have been too busy to give him." His expression cracked anger, giving way to something that looked dangerously close to grief. "You made that choice for both of us." "I made the only choice that made sense." "To who?" "You. To the woman standing in your apartment watching you plan a future that had no space for anything except ambition." My voice broke. "I loved you, Gerald. God, I loved you. But you loved something bigger. And I wasn't going to let our son spend his life competing with an empire for your attention." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Then, "Mom?" The world stopped. I turned. William stood in the doorway, still in his sleep clothes, hair disheveled, face pale, with the kind of shock that happens when you overhear the truth about your entire existence. My heart shattered. This is the moment everything changes. Pay attention. "William, how long have you been standing there?" Gerald's voice was barely audible. William's eyes moved between us. Lost. Betrayed. Trying to make sense of a conversation that had just rewritten his history. Long enough. 3 syllables, each one a door slamming shut. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, like I was a stranger wearing his mother's face. "You lied to me," his voice shook. "My whole life, every time I asked about my father, every time I wondered why he didn't want me, you knew. You knew he existed and you never." I was protecting you, I said desperately. From what? The truth? From feeling unwanted. I feel unwanted now. The words exploded out of him. Because the man who's been my supervisor for a week, the man I've been trying to impress, is apparently my father. And nobody thought I deserved to know. He turned to Gerald. Did you know? Gerald shook his head, eyes glistening. Not until Monday, the day I met you. Something felt familiar, but I didn't. I swear to you, William, I didn't know. You had 17 years to find out. The accusation hit Gerald like a physical blow. You're right, his voice cracked. You're absolutely right. I should have. Your mother tried to tell me, and I was too consumed by my own ambition to listen. That's on me, not her. William's jaw clenched. He looked between us two people who'd created him but couldn't figure out how to be honest about it. I can't. I need to. He didn't finish. Just turned and walked down the street, shoulders rigid, hands shoved in his pockets. I started after him. Let him go, Gerald said quietly. I spun on him. Don't tell me how to parent. You've had him in your life for a week. I've had him for 17 years. And look where that got us. There was no anger in his voice. Just hollow devastation. He hates both of us now. Number 2. The truth of it broke something in my chest. We stood there, two people who'd once fit together, now separated by choices we couldn't undo, and a son who just learned his entire life was built on silence. Gerald's composure finally shattered. He pressed his palms against his eyes, shoulders shaking with something between rage and grief. I missed everything, he whispered. First steps, first words, first day of school. 17 years of my son's life, because I was too blind to see what mattered. I wanted to hate him for making this about his loss. But watching him break, watching the man who commanded empires crumble under the weight of fatherhood he never got to claim, I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet. But understanding that we were both drowning in the consequences of choices made by younger, more foolish versions of ourselves. What do we do now? I asked. Gerald lowered his hands. His eyes were red-rimmed, raw. I don't know. He looked in the direction William had gone. But I want to fix this. However long it takes, whatever it costs, I want to know my son. He might not want to know you. Then I'll earn it. His voice hardened with determination I recognized. I've built companies from nothing, Carmen. I can learn how to be a father. It's not the same thing. I know. He met my eyes. But I have to try. He walked back to his car, paused with his hand on the door. For what it's worth. His voice was barely audible. I'm sorry. For not listening. For not seeing you. For everything I was too ambitious to notice. Then he was gone. I stood alone in my driveway while the morning sun climbed higher and the world kept spinning like nothing had just imploded. I made it inside. Made it to the couch. Made it exactly 3 seconds before the tears came. 17 years of silence. Detonated by 10 words from my son and 4 words from the man who should have been there all along. He looks like me, Carmen. And now everyone knew the truth. The question was whether any of us would survive it. William didn't come home that first day. He texted once, just 5 words that landed like stones in my chest. Staying at Marcus's. Need space. Marcus was his best friend since middle school. A good kid. Safe. But knowing where William was didn't stop me from lying awake all night. Replaying the moment his face changed when he heard the truth. The way he looked at me like I was someone he'd never met. Day 2. I called in sick to work, couldn't face patients who needed steady hands when mine wouldn't stop shaking. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out the journals. They were in a cardboard box at the back of my closet, buried under winter sweaters and old tax returns. 3 spiral notebooks with warped covers and pages that smelled like time. I'd started writing the day after I left Gerald when I was living in a studio apartment with walls so thin I could hear my neighbor's television through the plaster, trying to figure out how to be pregnant and alone at 24. I opened the first one. My handwriting from 17 years ago looked younger somehow, rounder, more hopeful. January 15th. I felt the baby move today. Just a flutter? Like a butterfly testing its wings. I put my hand on my stomach and thought about calling Gerald, telling him, giving him one more chance to choose us. But then I remembered his face that last night. How he looked at me like I was already fading, like I was part of a chapter he'd already finished reading. I can't raise a child with a man who sees us as a distraction from his destiny. So I won't." The words blurred. I closed the journal, pressed it against my chest, and let myself cry in a way I hadn't since the morning I'd packed my things and walked away from the only man I'd ever loved. My phone buzzed. Gerald. He'd been texting since the confrontation. Not constantly, he was too controlled for that. But enough that I knew he was unraveling in ways billionaires weren't supposed to unravel. "I don't know how to fix this, but I'm trying to learn. Does William like basketball? Music?" I realized I don't know anything about my own son. I looked at pictures from the internship orientation. He stands the way I used to stand. Did you notice that? I didn't respond. Couldn't find words that wouldn't either wound or forgive, and I wasn't ready to do either. Day 3. Constance showed up at my door. She was my supervisor at the clinic, a woman in her 60s, with steel gray hair and the kind of steady presence that made chaos feel manageable. We'd worked together for 8 years. She knew about William, knew I'd raised him alone, but I'd never told her the full story. She took one look at my face and walked past me into the kitchen. "Coffee or something stronger?" "I don't have anything stronger." "Then coffee it is." She started the pot without asking permission. "You've been out for 2 days. You don't miss work. So either you're genuinely sick, or something detonated in your life." I sat at the kitchen table, too exhausted to maintain the walls I usually kept up. The second one. She poured 2 cups, sat across from me, waited. And I told her everything. Not the sanitized version I'd lived with for 17 years, but the truth about Gerald. About the pregnancy he never knew about. About William discovering his father was the billionaire CEO he'd been trying to impress. About the confrontation that shattered all of us. Constance listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "That boy loves you," she finally said. "He's hurt. Angry. Feeling betrayed. But underneath all that, he loves you. That doesn't disappear in 3 days. He won't talk to me. Because he needs to process. You've had 17 years to live with this secret. He's had 72 hours. She reached across the table, covered my hand with hers. "Give him time. He'll come back. And if he doesn't, then you keep showing up. Keep being his mother. Keep loving him even when he can't love you back." She squeezed my hand. That's what parents do. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message I wasn't expecting. Not from William. From Gerald. He agreed to meet me. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. The cafe on Brennan Street. My stomach dropped. "Does he want me there?" The response came quickly. "He didn't ask for you. But I think he needs you nearby. Even if he doesn't know it yet." The cafe was called Grounds. One of those local places with mismatched furniture and walls covered in community bulletin boards and art from people who'd never see the inside of a gallery. I'd been there a handful of times, usually alone, usually when I needed to think. I arrived at 2:45 p.m. Ordered tea I wouldn't drink. Sat at a corner table with a book I wouldn't read. Positioned myself where I could see but hopefully not be seen. William arrived at 2:58 p.m. He looked older somehow, like the last 3 days had aged him in ways 17 years hadn't. He ordered coffee. Sat at a table by the window. Stared at his phone without really seeing it. Gerald walked in at exactly 3 p.m. Of course, he was punctual. Men who built empires didn't keep people waiting. But he looked different than he had 3 days ago. Less composed. His sweater was wrinkled. His hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it. He carried himself like a man walking into a meeting he wasn't sure he'd survive. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. William nodded. They sat down across from each other. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then William broke the silence. "Why didn't you come back for her?" His voice carried across the cafe, not loud, but sharp enough to cut. Gerald didn't flinch. "Because I was selfish and blind. I thought ambition mattered more than anything. And now? Now I realize everything I built means nothing if I didn't know you existed." William's jaw clenched. "That's a nice line. Did you practice it?" "Yes." Gerald's honesty seemed to surprise them both. "I've been rehearsing this conversation for 3 days. Trying to find words that don't sound like corporate speak or damage control. But the truth is," he exhaled, "I don't know how to do this. I've negotiated billion-dollar deals and managed thousands of employees, but I have no idea how to talk to my own son." Something shifted in William's expression. "Then don't talk like a CEO," he said quietly. "Talk like a person." Gerald nodded, swallowed hard. "I was 27 when I met your mother, ambitious to the point of obsession, convinced that success was the only thing that mattered. She was." He paused, searching for words. "She was light in a life that had become all strategy and no substance. She saw me, not the company I was building or the future I was chasing. Just me." William listened, expression unreadable. "When the funding came through, I thought I was making the right choice, focusing on the work, building something that would last. I didn't realize I was walking away from the only thing that actually mattered." His voice cracked. "I didn't realize she was trying to tell me I was about to become a father. She tried more than once." "I know," she told me. Gerald's hands curled into fists on the table. "I wasn't listening. I was too consumed by my own vision to hear anything that didn't fit into it. That's on me, not her." William was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "Do you care about her? Or is this guilt talking?" The question hung between them. Gerald looked out the window at the street, at the people passing by, at the world that had kept spinning while his past caught up to him. And then, he said the words that made my breath catch. "I never stopped caring about her," he said quietly. "I told myself I had, convinced myself that what we had was just youthful intensity, something I'd outgrown. But the truth is, I compared every woman I met after her to a standard none of them could reach, because none of them were Carmen." My breath caught. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling my heart hammer against my ribs. "She raised me alone," William said. "Worked herself to exhaustion to make sure I had what I needed. Never complained. Never made me feel like I was a burden." His voice hardened. "You don't get to waltz back into her life now, and I'm not waltzing." Gerald's voice was firm but not defensive. "I'm standing at the edge of her life, asking if there's room for me to try to earn what I should have fought for 17 years ago. Not just with you. With her." William studied his father, really looked at him for the first time. "I'm not ready to call you Dad," he said finally. "I don't expect you to. But," William's expression cracked slightly, "I think I want to know you. The real you, not the CEO version." Gerald's eyes glistened. "I'd like that. And if you hurt my mom again, I'll make your life hell." A sound escaped Gerald, half laugh, half sob. "Fair enough." They sat in silence for a while. Not comfortable, not resolved, but no longer enemies. Just two people trying to figure out how to be father and son when they'd missed all the steps that should have come first. William stood eventually. "I need time to process all of this. But maybe we could have lunch next week? Just us? I'd like that very much." William nodded, started to leave, paused. "She did the best she could," he said. "With what she knew, what she thought was right. Don't blame her for protecting me." "I don't," Gerald said softly. "I blame myself for not being worth protecting me from." William walked out. Gerald sat alone at the table, shoulders shaking with something between relief and grief. And I sat in my corner, tears streaming down my face, realizing that maybe, just maybe, we might actually survive this. William came home that night. I heard his key in the lock at 8:47 p.m. I'd been watching the clock like it held answers. He walked in quietly, dropped his bag by the door in the spot it always occupied, and stood in the hallway like he wasn't sure what the protocol was for returning home after your entire world had been rewritten. "Hey," I said from the couch. "Hey." We looked at each other across the distance of 12 feet that felt like miles. "You hungry?" I asked. I ate at Marcus's. Silence settled between us, not angry anymore, just uncertain, like we were both navigating terrain that had shifted beneath our feet. "I'm glad you're home," I said quietly. He nodded, disappeared into his room. I let him go. Constance's words echoed in my head. Give him time. Keep showing up. Keep being his mother. So I did. The next morning, I made his favorite breakfast blueberry pancakes, with the edges slightly crispy the way he liked them. Left them on the counter with a note, heading to work, love you. When I came home that evening, the plate was in the sink, washed. The note was gone. It was something. Day 2, he emerged from his room while I was folding laundry. "Can I ask you something?" His voice was careful, tentative. I set down the shirt I was folding. "Anything." He sat on the arm of the couch, not quite committing to staying, but not quite leaving either. "What was he like? Before all the empire stuff, when it was just you two?" The question landed softly, vulnerable. I thought about lying, softening the edges. But William deserved truth, even when it was complicated. "He was brilliant," I said. "The kind of brilliant that makes you feel like you're watching someone solve equations the rest of the world hasn't discovered yet. But he was also—" I searched for words that were honest without being cruel. "He was kind. Present. When he allowed himself to be. He used to bring me coffee at 2 a.m. when I was working late. Not expensive coffee, just whatever he could afford from the convenience store. But he'd remember exactly how I took it." William was quiet, absorbing this. He'd talk about the future, like it was something he could blueprint and build. Like if he worked hard enough and smart enough, he could create something that mattered. I loved that about him. His certainty, his hunger. I paused. But I also knew I couldn't compete with it. "Did he love you?" The question hit harder than I expected. I think he loved me as much as he was capable of loving anything that wasn't his work. But his work, it consumed him in ways I couldn't understand. Still can't, really. William's fingers drummed against his knee, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "At the cafe, he said he never stopped caring about you." My heart stuttered. "He said that?" "Yeah." William looked at me, with eyes that were trying to make sense of adults who'd made a mess of something that should have been simple. "Did you ever stop caring about him?" I could have lied. Should have, maybe. But my son was looking at me like the answer mattered. "No," I whispered. I convinced myself I had. But no. He nodded slowly, processing. "That's complicated. Welcome to being human." A small smile flickered across his face, the first one I'd seen in days. "I'm still mad at you," he said, "for keeping this from me. I know. But I get why you did it. Kind of." He stood, stretched. "I don't know if that makes it okay, but I get it." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was movement toward it. That night, William showed me an email. From Gerald. "William, I know you're still processing everything. I am too. But I wanted to share something with you, a project I've been developing that I think aligns with your design interests. It's a sustainable housing initiative, modular units that can be deployed in underserved communities. We're in the prototype phase, and I could use someone with fresh perspective on the aesthetic integration. No pressure. But if you're interested, I'd like to collaborate with you on this. Gerald." William read it aloud, then looked at me. "What do you think?" "I think he's trying. Is that enough?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But maybe it's a start." William stared at the email for a long moment, then typed a response I couldn't see and hit send. The next evening, he came home from his internship session looking different, lighter somehow. "We worked on the housing project," he said, dropping his bag. "Just the two of us in one of the design labs. He's good at this. Teaching, I mean. He doesn't talk down to me or treat me like I'm some kid who got lucky. He actually listens to my ideas." I watched my son's face light up, talking about his father, and felt something twist in my chest. Not jealousy, something more complicated. Like watching two pieces of a puzzle I'd kept separated, finally starting to fit together. "I don't hate him," William said suddenly. "I thought I would, or should, but I don't." He looked at me, confused. "I don't know what to do with him." "You don't have to know yet," I said. "You just have to figure out if you want to try." "Do you?" The question caught me off guard. Want to try what? Figuring out what to do with him. William's gaze was steady, because he asked if we'd both come to the office tomorrow, Saturday, for a private tour, just the three of us. My stomach dropped. "He asked for me too?" he said. William pulled out his phone, reading from another email. "I'd like to show both of you the work I've built, not as a CEO showing off. As someone hoping you'll understand why I disappeared into it." The words sat between us. "You don't have to go," William added quickly. "I can tell him it's too soon, or I'll go." His eyebrows rose. "You will? If you want me there." He nodded. "I do." Saturday morning arrived cold and bright. I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes, Trying to figure out what you wear when you're about to walk back into the building where you once belonged to a man who's now trying to know the son you kept from him. I settled on dark jeans and a gray sweater. Simple. Armor disguised as casual. William wore the navy button-down I'd bought him for his internship interviews. Too formal for a Saturday, but clearly chosen with the same care I'd used selecting my outfit. We were both trying. The building looked different on a Saturday. Quieter, less frenetic. The lobby's marble floors echoed with our footsteps as we approached security. Gerald was waiting. He stood near the elevators, hands in his pockets, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. When he saw us, something shifted in his expression. Relief. Hope. Fear. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. William nodded. I managed a small smile. We rode the elevator in silence. 42 floors of tension and unspoken questions. When the doors opened, I stepped into a world I'd convinced myself I'd left behind forever. Glass, steel, views that made the city look like a circuit board of lights and possibilities. I'd walked these halls once, 24 years old, and trying to look like I belonged among people who shaped futures. Back then, I'd felt small, out of place, like a visitor in someone else's destiny. Now, walking beside my son and the man who'd built this empire, I felt something different. Not small. Just aware of how far we'd all traveled to end up back in the same space. "This is the Innovation Lab," Gerald said, opening a door to a room that looked like a workshop merged with a gallery. Prototypes on sleek tables. Screens, displaying designs that probably cost more than my annual salary to develop. "This is where we test ideas before they go to manufacturing." William's eyes widened. He moved toward a modular housing unit model, the project Gerald had mentioned. "You built this already?" "Your suggestions from yesterday made me rethink the roof panel integration. I had the team mock up a new version overnight." William studied the model, reaching out to touch it, then stopping himself. "You can touch it," Gerald said softly. "It's yours as much as mine." I watched them, two brilliant minds, separated by 17 years, but connected by the same hunger, to create something that mattered. William asked questions. Gerald answered with patience. I'd never seen him show anyone. They talked about sustainable materials and aesthetic functionality and load-bearing calculations. And I realized I was watching my son discover he'd inherited more than his father's eyes. He'd inherited his passion. Gerald glanced at me. Our eyes met across the room. He looked at William, then at me, then back at William. And his expression cracked in a way that broke something in my chest. Because he was seeing it, finally seeing it. Not just his son, not just the woman he'd once loved, but the family he'd never known existed. The three of us, standing in a space he'd built while we'd been building a life without him. "Carmen," he said quietly, "can I show you something?" William was absorbed in the prototype. I followed Gerald to the windows overlooking the city. "I used to stand here," he said, "and think I'd made it. That this," he gestured at the office, "the view, the empire, was what success looked like." He turned to face me. "I was wrong, Gerald. Success is him." He nodded toward William. "Standing in a lab I built, improving ideas I thought were finished. Success is you, raising a son who's kinder and more grounded than I ever was. Success is," his voice broke. "Success is everything I didn't know I'd lost." Tears blurred my vision. "We can't undo 17 years, I whispered. "No," he agreed, "but maybe we can figure out what to do with the years we have left." William called out from across the room, excited about some detail in the design. Gerald and I turned toward him, both of us, at the same time, pulled by the same gravity. Our son. And for the first time in 17 years, I let myself imagine what it might look like to not do this alone. The changes started small. Gerald began showing up to the innovation lab when William's sessions were scheduled. Not hovering, he was too smart for that, but present, available. I learned this from William, who mentioned it casually over dinner one Tuesday, like it wasn't reshaping his entire understanding of what a father could be. He cleared his afternoon meetings, William said, twirling pasta on his fork. Said the housing project was more important than a call with Tokyo investors. I looked up from my plate. He said that? Not just said it. Did it. William's expression was careful, like he was testing whether it was okay to be impressed. We spent 3 hours working through solar panel integration, He didn't check his phone once. For a man who'd once let investor calls interrupt every conversation, that was seismic. The emails started arriving too. Not to William, to me. Carmen. William mentioned he likes that specific brand of charcoal pencils for sketching. I had some delivered to the house. Not trying to buy anything. Just trying to pay attention. Gerald. Carmen. I remembered you used to drink Earl Grey tea. There's a cafe near the clinic that imports it from a small farm in Sri Lanka. Thought you might like it. Not an apology, just a small acknowledgement that I'm remembering. Gerald. Actions. Small ones. The kind that didn't announce themselves but quietly said, I'm learning. I'm trying. I see you. I didn't respond to the emails. Couldn't figure out what words to use that wouldn't either wound or forgive too quickly. But the tea showed up. And it was perfect, exactly how I used to take it. The detail felt like evidence of something I wasn't ready to name. 2 weeks after the office tour, William came home glowing in a way that had nothing to do with grades or accomplishments. He asked about my design portfolio, William said, dropping onto the couch beside me. Not the one I submitted for the internship. My personal work. The sketches I do for fun. What did he say? He said I have an eye for negative space. That the best designers understand what not to include. William's voice carried wonder. Then he showed me some of his early prototypes, before Aiken Innovations, when it was just him in a basement apartment, sketching circuits on graph paper. I watched my son talk about his father, and something twisted in my chest. Because this was what I'd been afraid of for 17 years. Not that Gerald would reject William, but that he'd be good at this, that William would love him, that I'd have to watch my son bond with the man who'd once made me feel like I wasn't enough. You okay, Mom? William asked. I forced a smile. Just tired. Long shift. He studied me with eyes that were learning to see past my defenses. He asks about you, William said quietly. A lot. What you're like. What you enjoy. If you're... He trailed off. If I'm what? If you're seeing anyone. My breath caught. What did you tell him? The truth. That you've been too busy raising me to have time for anything else. William's expression softened. I didn't realize how lonely that must have been. Until now, watching you watch us. The observation landed like a hand on my shoulder. I'm not lonely, I lied. I have you. Yeah. He stood, heading to his room. But you should have more. That Friday, I stayed late at the clinic finishing patient files. The building emptied around me, doctors heading home to families, nurses clocking out after double shifts, janitors starting their rounds. I was locking up the supply closet when I heard footsteps behind me. Working late again? I turned. Harold Chen stood in the hallway, medical bag in one hand, looking at me with the kind of concern that came from 30 years of reading people. Harold was the clinic's senior physician, 72 years old, semi-retired, still showing up 3 days a week because he couldn't imagine not helping people. He'd become something like a mentor to me over the years, the kind of steady presence that asked hard questions without judgment. Just catching up, I said. He nodded, not buying it. Coffee? We ended up in the break room, sitting across from each other with cups of coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. Constance mentioned you've been distracted lately, Harold said. Said something about your son's father reappearing. I shouldn't have been surprised. Constance and Harold had worked together for decades. They shared information the way longtime partners do, not as gossip, but as care. It's complicated, I said. Most important things are. He took a sip of coffee, grimaced at the bitterness, kept drinking anyway. What's he like? The father? Brilliant, driven, the kind of man who builds empires and doesn't notice the casualties. And now he's trying, showing up for William, being present in ways he never was with me. I stared into my cup, and I don't know if I'm watching to protect William or because part of me still. I couldn't finish the sentence. Harold was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. Men like that don't change easily, Carmen. They learn new behaviors, master new skills. But the core of who they are? That takes more than a few weeks of good intentions. So you're saying I shouldn't trust him? I'm saying be careful, for William's sake. And yours. He set down his cup. Ambitious men are good at recognizing what they want and pursuing it relentlessly. But wanting something and being capable of sustaining it? Those are different skills. His words followed me home, settled into the space between my ribs, and stayed there. The next afternoon, my phone rang. Gerald. I stared at his name on the screen for 3 rings before answering. Carmen. His voice was rougher than usual. Tired. Can we talk? In person? William's home. I know. I'm outside. My stomach dropped. I walked to the window. His black town car sat at the curb, the same one from the confrontation weeks ago. But this time, he stood beside it, rather than in it, waiting. I told William I'd be back in a few minutes and walked outside. Gerald looked at me with an expression that was hard to decipher, not the controlled CEO face. Something rawer. I need to tell you something, he said. We walked, not toward anything specific, just movement that made talking easier than standing still. Have you ever watched someone try to rebuild what they destroyed? It's beautiful and terrifying at the same time. If you're invested in seeing whether second chances are real or just wishful thinking, do me a favor, hit that like button. And drop a comment telling me, do people really change, or do they just get better at hiding who they've always been? I read every single one. William showed me his portfolio yesterday, Gerald began. The full one, architectural sketches, product designs. This incredible concept for modular furniture that adapts to different living spaces. His voice carried something between pride and grief. He's brilliant, Carmen. Not just smart, genuinely, remarkably brilliant. I know. I didn't. The words came out broken. I didn't know what I lost until I saw him, until I watched him work through a design problem the way I used to, until I heard him laugh at something stupid and realized I've missed 17 years of that sound. We stopped walking. Stood under a streetlight that was just beginning to flicker on in the fading daylight. Every conversation with him is a reminder of everything I wasn't there for. Gerald continued. First words, first steps, scraped knees, school plays, all the moments that make a childhood. I threw them away, chasing something I thought mattered more. Gerald. And the worst part? He looked at me with eyes that glistened in the dimming light. I threw you away too, convinced myself you were part of a chapter I'd moved beyond. But Carmen, his voice cracked. You were the only real thing I ever had, and I was too blind to see it. My heart hammered against my ribs. You can't just show up after 17 years and say things like that. I know. You can't expect me to forgive everything because you're finally paying attention. I don't. You destroyed me. The words ripped out before I could stop them. I loved you, completely. And you looked at me like I was furniture you'd outgrown. I know. Tears tracked down his face. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't have words that hold enough weight. We stood there, 2 people separated by choices we couldn't undo, and feelings that refused to stay buried. I don't know if I can do this, I whispered. Do what? Watch William love you. Watch you be the father I always knew you could be if you just tried. Watch you prove that I was right about who you were underneath the ambition. My voice broke, because if I was right about that, then maybe I was wrong to keep him from you. And I can't carry that. Gerald reached out, then stopped himself, hands hovering in the space between us. You weren't wrong, he said firmly. You were protecting our son from a man who didn't deserve him. I'm only becoming someone who might deserve him now, because you raised him to be worth rising to meet. The words settled into my chest, heavy and true. I need time, I said, to figure out if this is real, if you're really changing or just performing change. I'll give you all the time you need. He stepped back, giving me space. But Carmen, I'm not going anywhere. Not from William's life, and not from yours. Not unless you tell me to. He walked back to his car. I stood under the streetlight, Harold's warning echoing in my mind. Men like that don't change easily. But what if they could? What if the man I'd loved at 24 was still there, just buried under 17 years of empire building? And what scared me more, that he'd prove Harold right, or that he'd prove me right about who he could have been all along. I walked home slowly, realizing the question that haunted me most. Was I protecting William from potential disappointment? Or was I protecting my own heart from breaking the same way twice? The article went live at 6:23 a.m. on a Thursday. I woke to 17 missed calls and a text from Constance that made my blood freeze. Turn on your phone's privacy settings. Now. I grabbed my laptop with shaking hands and typed Gerald's name into the search bar. The headline hit me like a fist. Billionaire CEO's secret son. Aiken Innovations intern, revealed to be Gerald Aiken's hidden heir. Below it, a photo. William walking into the Aiken Innovations building, backpack slung over one shoulder, face caught in profile. The caption read, William Reyes, 17, whose mother Carmen Reyes once worked for Aiken's consulting firm 17 years ago. My hands went numb. The article was worse than the headline. Someone had obtained my employee ID photo from 17 years ago, 24-year-old Carmen, with cheap highlights and clearance rack blazer, smiling like I belonged in Gerald's world. They'd placed it next to a current photo of William, then next to a photo of young Gerald. The resemblance was undeniable. Below the photos, a timeline. Carmen Reyes, employed by Aiken's consulting firm, March 2007, August 2007. Last day of employment. No notice given. William Reyes' birth date, October 15, 2008. Accepted to Aiken Innovations internship, 17 years later. They'd done the math in bold red text, 9 months after mysterious departure. But the worst part was the comments. I scrolled through them, each one a knife. She definitely trapped him. Classic move. Feel bad for the kid who actually deserved that internship spot. Gold digger played the long game. Respect the hustle. Billionaire's secret love child working for daddy's company. You can't write this stuff. Someone had photoshopped William's face next to Gerald's with the caption, DNA doesn't lie. Nepotism does. It had 89,000 shares. The piece dripped with insinuation. Questions swirl around whether Reyes leveraged a past relationship to secure her son's position in the prestigious internship program. Sources close to the company report CEO Aiken has taken unusual personal interest in the young intern. The resemblance between father and son is unmistakable to those who've seen them together. They made it sound calculated, like I'd orchestrated everything, like William's brilliance was irrelevant compared to biology and conspiracy. The worst part? It gets so much worse. I was still staring at the screen when William's door slammed open. He stood in the hallway, phone in his hand, face drained of color. Mom. His voice cracked. Everyone's texting me. My classmates. The other interns. They're saying they think I only got in because... His phone buzzed again, then again, notifications flooding in faster than he could dismiss them. I crossed the room, took the phone from his shaking hands, and turned it off. Listen to me, I said. You earned that internship. You were chosen because you're brilliant. Not because of who your father is. But they don't know that. Tears tracked down his face, the kind of helpless anger that comes from being publicly defined by something beyond your control. The other interns are looking at me like I'm a fraud, like I stole someone else's spot. My phone rang. Gerald. I answered, already knowing what he was going to say. Carmen, I'm handling this. His voice was tight, controlled fury barely contained. I've got legal working on takedowns, and my PR team drafting a statement. This will be contained by noon. Contained? The word came out sharp. It's already everywhere. William's face is plastered across tech blogs and gossip sites. You can't contain what's already detonated. I can protect him. This is exactly what I was afraid of. The accusation ripped out of me. Your world, your spotlight, your chaos bleeding into our lives. We were fine before you. You weren't fine. His voice cut through mine. You were struggling, alone, and William deserves better than fine. He deserves privacy. Dignity. Not to be dissected by strangers who think they know our story. Silence crackled on the line. I'll fix this, Gerald said quietly. I swear to you, I'll fix this. He hung up before I could tell him some things can't be fixed with lawyers and PR teams. By noon, Aiken Innovations had released a statement. Professional, measured. Confirming that William was Gerald's son, that the internship selection was merit-based, and completed before Gerald knew of their connection, that the company stood behind its process. It didn't matter. The internet had already made up its mind. Comment sections filled with judgment and speculation. Of course the billionaire's kid got in. Nepotism at its finest. Feel bad for the kid who deserved that spot. She definitely planned this. 17 years is a long game. William stayed in his room all day. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't talk. I sat outside his door at 3 p.m., back against the wall, feeling like the world was collapsing and I couldn't figure out which beam to hold up first. At 4:17 p.m., someone knocked on our door. Gerald stood on my porch, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 8 hours. His eyes were red-rimmed. His usually perfect appearance, disheveled shirt sleeves, rolled up, tie missing, hair in disarray from running his hands through it too many times. "I fired the entire PR team," he said without preamble. "What?" "The leak came from inside the company. Someone in communications sold the story." His jaw clenched. "They're gone. Legal is pursuing charges. That doesn't undo the damage." "I know." He looked past me toward William's closed door. "Can I see him?" "I don't think." William's door opened. He stood there in sweatpants and the Aiken Innovations t-shirt they'd given all the interns at orientation. His eyes were swollen from crying. "I'm quitting," he said. The words landed like stones in still water. "William," I started. "No." His voice was firm despite the tremor in it. "I can't go back there. Can't face the other interns who think I stole this from someone who deserved it. Can't walk through that building knowing everyone's looking at me, wondering if I'm actually smart or just lucky to be your son." He looked at Gerald. This was a mistake. All of it. Gerald flinched, like William had struck him. "You earned your place," he said hoarsely. "Every single person involved in the selection process confirmed it. Your portfolio was in the top 3. Your design concepts were revolutionary. You got in because you're brilliant. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what people believe." William's hands clenched into fists. "And they believe I'm a fraud." He looked at me, eyes pleading. "Tell him, Mom. Tell him this isn't worth it." And here's where I had a choice. I could agree, could tell William to walk away, protect him from the scrutiny and judgment and impossible position he'd been thrust into through no fault of his own. We could go back to our quiet life, safe, small, unknown. We could run, the way I'd run 17 years ago. But then, I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw more than hurt. I saw potential being crushed by other people's assumptions. Brilliance being dimmed because the world decided his father's identity mattered more than his own capabilities. And I realized something. Teaching William to run from hard things wasn't protecting him. It was teaching him that other people's judgments held more power than his own truth. "No," I said quietly. Both of them stared at me. "Mom, you're not quitting." I stood, walked to William, placed my hands on his shoulders. "Because quitting means they win. Every person who decided you didn't deserve this gets to be right. Every assumption about nepotism and privilege gets reinforced. But people will always think something. That's not your burden to carry." I held his gaze. "Your burden is showing up, doing the work, being so undeniably brilliant that the noise becomes irrelevant." William's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are." I pulled him close. "Because you're my son, and we don't run from hard things. We walk through them until we reach the other side." Over William's shoulder, I saw Gerald watching us with an expression that broke something in my chest. "And you," I turned to Gerald, still holding William. "You wanted a chance to be his father? This is what that looks like. Not the fun parts. Not the mentorship sessions and design projects, but standing beside him when the world gets ugly, showing him that family means not having to face hard things alone." Gerald nodded slowly. "I can do that." "Then prove it." My voice was steel, not with PR statements or legal threats, but by being there, every single day. Even when it's uncomfortable. William pulled back, wiped his eyes. "What if I mess up? What if I'm not as good as they think, and everyone says I only stayed because you protected me?" Gerald stepped forward. "Then you'll learn. Grow. Get better. That's what the internship is for." His voice roughened. "But William, you won't mess up. I've seen your work. Watched you solve problems engineers with decades of experience couldn't crack. You belong there. Not because of me, because of you." William looked between us, his mother who'd raised him to be brave and his father who was learning how. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll stay. But if it gets worse, then we'll face it together," I said firmly. "All 3 of us." Gerald's expression shifted to something that looked like gratitude and wonder. "Together," he echoed. That night, after William finally fell asleep, and Gerald had left with promises to increase security and deal with any ongoing media issues, I sat in the dark living room and realized something terrifying. I wasn't just fighting for William anymore. I was fighting for the possibility that broken things could be rebuilt. That families torn apart could find their way back together. That the man who'd once destroyed me might actually become someone worth the risk of loving again. The Intern showcase was held in Aiken Innovation's main conference hall, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city look like scattered diamonds against black velvet. 10 stations set up around the room's perimeter, each displaying months of work compressed into presentations that would determine whether these brilliant young minds received offers for permanent positions. I stood at the back, trying to look invisible. William's station was third from the left. His sustainable housing prototype sat on a pristine white table, surrounded by design schematics and digital renderings on a mounted screen. He wore the navy button-down again, pressed this time, paired with dark slacks. I'd bought him last week when he admitted his presentation clothes felt too much like pretending to be someone he wasn't. They should feel like you being the best version of yourself, I'd told him while we stood in the department store fitting room. That's different from pretending. Now, watching him adjust his display one more time, I saw both versions: the boy who still checked if his hair looked okay, and the young man who'd spent 3 months proving he belonged in rooms full of people who doubted him. Is this seat taken? I turned. Gerald stood beside me, holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked different than I'd ever seen him, nervous in a way that had nothing to do with business deals or investor meetings. His hands weren't quite steady as he offered me one of the cups. I didn't know if you still took it the same way, he said quietly. 2 sugars? Splash of cream? I took the cup. You remembered. I remember everything about you, Carmen. I just spent 17 years pretending I didn't. We sat in the back row as the presentations began. Each intern had 10 minutes to present their project, followed by 5 minutes of questions from a panel of senior engineers and designers. The first presenter, a girl from MIT with those 2 patents William had mentioned, delivered a flawless pitch about renewable energy storage that made the panel nod approvingly. The second presenter stumbled slightly but recovered. Solid work, good potential. Then it was William's turn. Gerald's knee bounced. A tiny movement most people wouldn't notice. But I'd spent 6 months learning his tells back when we were young and reckless, and I knew what anxiety looked like on a man who rarely showed it. I reached over without thinking and placed my hand on his knee. He went still, looked at my hand, then at me. He's going to be brilliant, I whispered. I know. His voice was rough. That's what terrifies me. William began. The housing crisis isn't just about affordability, he said, voice clear and confident despite the tremor I knew only I could hear. It's about dignity. About people deserving spaces that don't just shelter them, but allow them to thrive. He walked the panel through his modular housing design, the one he'd been developing with Gerald over the past months, showed how units could be deployed rapidly, adapted to different climates, integrated with sustainable energy systems. His hands moved as he talked, sketching possibilities in the air the way his father did when explaining complex concepts. The resemblance was startling. Not just physical, though, that was undeniable, but in the way they both saw problems as puzzles waiting to be solved. The way brilliance sat comfortably on their shoulders, like a coat they'd been born wearing. The prototype costs 40% less than traditional construction, William continued, and can be assembled in 72 hours by a team of 4. But more importantly, he paused, looking directly at the panel. It treats housing as a human right, not a luxury commodity. Silence. Then the panel started asking questions, hard ones, technical specifications, cost analyses, scalability concerns. William answered every single one without hesitation. Beside me, Gerald leaned forward, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. I watched him watch our son, and saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Not of failure, of missing this, of how many more moments like this he'd already lost. The presentation ended. Applause erupted. Not polite, professional, clapping, genuine, enthusiastic recognition of something exceptional. William's face broke into a smile that made my chest ache. The panel asked him to stay for additional questions. 30 minutes of detailed discussion about implementation strategies and patent considerations. Gerald and I sat frozen in the back, watching engineers with decades of experience treat our 17-year-old son like an equal. When it finally ended and the showcase moved to the reception portion, William made his way through the crowd, other interns congratulating him, panel members shaking his hand, program directors asking for follow-up meetings. He found us in the back, looked at Gerald. I couldn't have done this without you. he said quietly. "The mentorship, the guidance, the way you pushed me to think bigger than I thought I could." Gerald's eyes glistened. "You did this. I just had the privilege of watching." William nodded slowly, took a breath, like he was steadying himself, before jumping off something high. "I'm not ready to call you Dad." The words hung in the air. I felt Gerald tense beside me. But William's voice cracked. "I want you in my life, not just as a mentor or the CEO who runs the company, as my father, if you still want that." Gerald's composure shattered. He pulled William into an embrace that looked like it was holding together everything that had been broken. His shoulders shook, tears tracked down his face. And for the first time since I'd known him, Gerald Aiken let himself be completely, vulnerably human. "Yes," he whispered against William's shoulder. "God, yes, that's all I want." They held each other, while the reception continued around them, two people separated by 17 years, finding their way back to something that looked like family. Take a breath, because this moment right here, this is what healing looks like. It's messy and imperfect, and 17 years too late, but it's real. If this story is making you feel something, hope, heartbreak, maybe both, share it with someone who needs to believe broken things can be fixed. And subscribe, because we're almost to the ending, and you're going to want to see how this family finally finds their way home. I turned away, blinking back tears, and pretended to be very interested in the refreshment table. The reception lasted another hour. William was swept up in conversations with potential employers and program directors. Gerald kept getting pulled into obligatory CEO networking. I stayed at the edges, watching the life I'd built in secret collide with the world I'd once tried to belong to. At 9:47 p.m., I finally headed to the parking garage. The elevator doors were closing when a hand stopped them. Gerald stepped inside. We rode down in silence. 42 floors of unspoken words, pressing against the metal walls. "Thank you," he said, as the numbers ticked lower, "for raising him to be that remarkable." He was always remarkable. I just tried not to get in the way. "Carmen." The elevator doors opened. We walked through the nearly empty parking garage, footsteps echoing against concrete. My car was in the far corner. Gerald walked beside me, even though his town car was probably waiting at the executive entrance. I reached my car, turned to say goodbye. But Gerald was standing closer than I expected. Close enough that I could see the exhaustion around his eyes, the stubble he hadn't shaved, the way he looked at me like I was still the person who mattered most. "Tonight," he said quietly, watching him present, watching you watch him, seeing what you built from the wreckage I left behind. He swallowed hard. I realized something. What? That building an empire means nothing if you destroy the people who could have helped you understand what empire is actually for. The words settled between us. Heavy, true. I spent 17 years convincing myself I made the right choice, he continued, telling myself that ambition required sacrifice, that I couldn't have both the future I was building and the life I wanted with you. His voice dropped to barely audible. I was wrong, Carmen, about everything. My heart hammered against my ribs. Gerald, I know I have no right to ask this. I know I destroyed what we had, but, he stepped closer. I never stopped caring about you, never stopped wondering what our life could have been if I'd just listened. If I'd chosen differently. You can't rewrite 17 years, I whispered. No, but maybe I can try to write the next 18 better. His hand lifted, hesitated, then gently touched my face. I want a chance, Carmen, at being William's father, at earning your trust, his voice cracked, at both of you, if you'll let me try. I should have stepped back, should have reminded him of all the reasons this was dangerous. All the ways he'd proven he wasn't capable of putting people before ambition. But his hand was warm against my cheek, and his eyes held something I'd convinced myself I'd imagined 17 years ago. Love. Raw. Imperfect. Real. I never stopped caring either, I admitted. I just learned to live with the ache of it. His breath hitched. He leaned closer, his other hand finding my waist, pulling me gently toward him. I could feel his heartbeat. Smell his cologne different from what he used to wear, but somehow still familiar. His lips were inches from mine. 17 years of distance, collapsing into nothing. Mom? We sprang apart. William stood 15 feet away, backpack over one shoulder, looking between us with an expression that was half surprise, half something that might have been approval. Sorry, he said, not sounding sorry at all. Didn't mean to interrupt. Gerald cleared his throat, stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself even as his hands shook. You didn't interrupt anything, I said too quickly. William's eyebrow raised so much like his father's, it was almost funny. Right, sure. He walked toward us. I just wanted to say thanks, for both of you being here tonight, for everything. He looked at Gerald, then at me, then back at Gerald with an expression that was absolutely his attempt at subtle. I'm going to get a ride with Marcus. Take your time saying goodbye. Before either of us could respond, he was gone, walking back toward the elevator, with a spring in his step that said he knew exactly what he'd interrupted, and wasn't remotely sorry about it. Gerald and I stood in the parking garage, the almost kiss hanging between us like an unfinished sentence. Carmen. Not yet, I said softly. Whatever this is, it's too important to rush, too fragile to trust. He nodded, disappointment and understanding warring on his face. But maybe I forced the words out. Maybe we could try, slowly, carefully, see if what we had 17 years ago is still there underneath everything that's happened. His expression transformed, hope blooming cautiously, like spring after a brutal winter. I would like that very much. I got in my car, started the engine, looked up to find him still standing there, watching me like he was afraid I'd disappear if he looked away. Gerald? Yeah? You did good tonight. As a father, he needed you there, and you showed up. His smile was small, but genuine. That's all I want to do from now on. Show up. I drove home with my heart racing and my hand still shaking from the kiss that didn't happen but changed everything anyway. 3 weeks after the showcase, I found myself standing in my kitchen at 6 a.m. watching my son make breakfast. Not just any breakfast, elaborate French toast with berries and whipped cream. The kind of meal that required actual effort, rather than pouring cereal into a bowl. He hummed while he cooked. An actual melody. Something I hadn't heard him do since he was small, and thought the world was simple. Big day? I asked, pouring coffee. He glanced over his shoulder, grinning. Gerald's taking me to visit the manufacturing facility upstate. Wants my input on the production line design for the housing units. Gerald. Not Mr. Aiken. Not my supervisor. Just his father's name. Spoken with casual familiarity, that still made my chest tighten. That's a 5-hour drive, I said. I know. We'll probably talk the whole way. He plated the French toast, set it in front of me. He's teaching me about supply chain logistics. I'm teaching him about music. Fair trade. I took a bite. Perfect. When had my son learned to cook like this? Who taught you to make French toast? Gerald. William sat across from me with his own plate. Last Saturday when you were at work, he said you used to make it for him when you were together. Wanted to learn so he could teach me. The information landed softly. A man learning recipes from 17 years ago so he could pass them to the son he'd missed raising. He talks about you a lot, William said, watching my face. When we're working, driving, just existing together. He'll mention something random, how you used to organize his apartment by color, or the way you'd fall asleep reading with your hands still holding the page. William's expression softened. He remembers everything, Mom. Like he's been carrying all these memories around and finally has someone to share them with. My throat tightened. Does that bother you? Us being part of conversations? No. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. It makes me understand you both better. Like I'm getting to know the people you were before life got complicated. Complicated, that was one word for it. The past 3 weeks had been an education in what blended family looked like when nobody had a manual. William spent weekends with Gerald, sometimes working on projects, sometimes just existing in the same space, learning how to be father and son. They went to basketball games, art museums, a coding workshop where apparently Gerald got schooled by a 12-year-old and laughed about it for days. William came home from each visit a little more whole. And I watched from the sidelines, heart torn between relief that my son finally had his father and terror that I was losing him to a world I'd never quite belonged to. You're not losing me, William said, like he could read my mind. I looked up, startled. I can see it in your face sometimes. When I talk about Gerald, like you're worried I'm choosing him over you. He reached across the table, squeezed my hand. That's not how this works, Mom. You're not something I move past. You're the foundation everything else gets built on. Tears blurred my vision. When did you get so wise? Had a good teacher. That afternoon, while William was upstate learning about manufacturing logistics, my phone rang. Gerald. I have a question, he said without preamble, and I need you to actually consider it instead of giving me the safe answer. My stomach flipped. Okay. Have dinner with me, Saturday night, not coffee to discuss William, not a quick conversation in parking garages, an actual date. He paused. I want to take you somewhere nice and spend 3 hours learning who you are now, not who you were at 24. My first instinct was to say no. To list all the reasons this was dangerous, the power imbalance, the history, the fear of being destroyed twice by the same person. But then I thought about the man who'd learned to make French toast from memory, who'd spent 3 hours answering questions from our son about terrible music choices, who looked at me in parking garages like I was still worth choosing. Okay, I said quietly. Okay? Saturday, 7 o'clock. But Gerald? Yeah? I'm not the same person I was. I'm harder, more cautious, less willing to believe in beautiful promises. I know. His voice was soft. I'm not asking for the 24-year-old who trusted too easily. I'm asking the 41-year-old who built an entire human being's life with nothing but determination and love. That woman terrifies me, and I want to know her. Saturday arrived wrapped in nerves I hadn't felt in 17 years. I tried on 4 outfits before settling on a simple black dress that made me feel elegant rather than desperate. Constance had insisted on doing my hair some twisted updo that looked effortless but had taken 40 minutes to achieve. You look beautiful, William said when I emerged from my room. I look nervous. That too, he grinned, but mostly beautiful. He's going to forget how to breathe when he sees you. The restaurant was small, intimate, the kind of place where they didn't rush you through courses and the lighting made everyone look softer. Gerald stood when I arrived, and I watched his expression shift through several emotions before landing on something that looked like reverence. Hi, he said. Hi. We sat. Ordered wine neither of us would drink much of, because we were too aware of each other to need artificial relaxation. And then, we talked. Not about William, not about the past, about now. I learned he'd started seeing a therapist after the confrontation on my driveway, trying to understand why he'd let ambition consume everything else. He learned I'd been taking night classes in medical coding, trying to build towards something more than transcription work. We compared favorite books, discovered we both loved terrible reality cooking shows, debated whether true AI consciousness was possible. 3 hours disappeared. At the end, when he walked me to my car, he didn't try to kiss me, just took my hand and held it like it was something precious. Can we do this again? He asked. Yeah, we can. You know what's wild? Sometimes the hardest part isn't the grand gesture. It's showing up, day after day, doing the small things that rebuild trust, brick by brick. If you're rooting for this family, if you want to see whether love can survive 17 years of silence, drop a comment and tell me about your own second chance story. Have you ever given someone another opportunity after they broke your heart? I want to hear about it. And hit that subscribe button, because stories like this, they remind us that healing is possible. That night, I sat in my dark living room and let myself think about everything that had changed. 4 months ago, I was a woman raising her son alone, convinced that was how the story ended. Now, I was watching that son build a relationship with a father who'd never known he existed. Watching a man who'd once broken me learn how to be worthy of second chances. Motherhood had taught me that love isn't finite, that opening your heart to more people doesn't diminish what you already feel, it expands it. William loving Gerald didn't erase the 17 years we'd built together. It added dimension to them. But this possibility of letting Gerald back into my heart, that was different. Because mothers forgive for their children, women forgive for themselves. And I was learning that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about deciding whether the person who hurt you had done the work to become someone different. Gerald was doing the work. Showing up for William even when it was uncomfortable. Learning to be present instead of perpetually chasing the next achievement. Sitting in therapy rooms, confronting the ways ambition had made him blind to what mattered. That didn't erase 17 years, didn't undo the pain of being left, didn't magically heal the scar tissue around my heart. But maybe it was enough to try. The truth is, second chances are terrifying. They require believing that people can change while knowing they might disappoint you again. They demand vulnerability from hearts that learn to protect themselves. They ask you to step back into spaces that once destroyed you and trust that this time will be different. I didn't know if Gerald and I would work, didn't know if the love we'd had at 24 could be rebuilt into something sustainable at 41. Didn't know if I was brave enough to risk breaking again. But I knew William was watching, learning from us what it meant to fight for difficult things, what it looked like when adults chose growth over comfort, how families could be shattered and slowly, carefully, painfully pieced back together. So I would try. Not because the story demanded a tidy ending. Not because single mothers were supposed to find their way back to the men who left them, but because somewhere between raising our son and watching Gerald become the father he should have been all along, I'd discovered something I'd forgotten. Hope. Shaky. Uncertain. Terrifying. But hope nonetheless. My phone buzzed. A text from Gerald. Thank you for tonight. For giving me a chance to prove I can be better. For raising a son remarkable enough to make me want to be worthy of both of you. I typed back, thank you for showing up. For William. And maybe, eventually, for me too. In the morning, William would wake up and drive with his father to another project. I would go to work at the clinic and think about the date I'd agreed to next Saturday. We would all continue learning how to be this strange, pieced-together family that didn't follow any traditional blueprint. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, old wounds that ached when we least expected them. But we would keep choosing each other, keep showing up, keep learning what it meant to build something new from the fragments of what broke. 2 weeks later, Gerald asked me to meet him at the cafe, where he and William had their first real conversation. The same corner table, the same afternoon light filtering through windows. But this time, it was just us. I have something to tell you, he said, and I felt my stomach drop, preparing for bad news. But his face was soft, nervous in a way I'd rarely seen. I've been thinking about what you said, about being harder now, more cautious, less willing to believe in promises. He reached across the table, took my hand. So I'm not going to make you promises about the future. I'm just going to tell you what I'm doing today. Okay. Today, I woke up thinking about you. Today, I rearranged my entire schedule so I could have this hour with you. Today, I'm choosing you. Not because I owe you something, not because of William, but because you're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too stupid to see it the first time. His voice roughened. And tomorrow, I'm going to wake up and choose you again. And the day after that, for as many days as you'll let me. Tears tracked down my face. That's not a promise, I whispered. That's better than a promise. Good, he smiled. Because I'm done making promises I'm not sure I can keep. I'm just going to show up, every day, until you believe me. This is what real love looks like. Not the Hollywood version, not the fairy tale, but the messy, imperfect, show up every day kind of love that rebuilds what broke. If this story touched you, if it made you believe that people can change, that families can heal, that second chances are real, I need you to do 3 things. First, hit that like button so more people who need this story can find it. Second, subscribe, because I'm going to keep telling stories about real love, real forgiveness, and real hope. And third, this is the important one, share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late, that broken things can be mended, that the best chapter of your life might still be ahead of you. Drop a comment telling me what this story meant to you. I read every single one, and your words matter more than you know. 6 months later, William started his first semester at college. Architecture program, full scholarship. Offers from 3 different firms for internships before he even graduated. We all helped him move into his dorm, me carrying boxes of books, Gerald assembling furniture with the kind of focus he usually reserved for billion-dollar deals. The 3 of us working together like we'd been doing this for years instead of months. When everything was unpacked and it was time to leave, William hugged me first. Thank you, he whispered, for everything, for raising me, for being brave enough to let him back in, for teaching me what it looks like to fight for family. Then he turned to Gerald. Dad, he said, the words still new but getting easier every time. Thanks for showing up, for proving you could change. Gerald's eyes glistened. Thanks for giving me the chance. We drove home together, Gerald and I. His hand found mine somewhere around mile 40. We didn't talk much. Didn't need to. At my house, he walked me to the door. I should go, he said, but he didn't move. Or, I said carefully, you could stay. For coffee. For conversation. For whatever comes next. He looked at me with an expression that held 17 years of regret, and 6 months of showing up, and a future we were still figuring out how to write. I would like that very much. We went inside together. And for the first time in 17 years, I didn't feel like I was doing life alone. Closing monologue. People ask me sometimes how this story ends. The truth is, it doesn't. Not in the way stories are supposed to end, with every question answered and every conflict resolved and everyone living happily ever after. Because life isn't like that. Gerald and I are still learning how to be together, still navigating what it means to build a relationship on the ruins of what we once had. Some days are easy. Some days the old wounds ache. But we keep showing up. William calls every Sunday. Sometimes he talks to me, sometimes to Gerald. Usually, to both of us. His voice carrying that easy comfort that comes from knowing you're loved by people who are trying their best. The three of us have dinner together once a month. Sometimes at my place, sometimes at Gerald's. Once, memorably, at a terrible Thai restaurant that we all hated but laughed about for weeks. We're not a traditional family. We're better. Because we chose this, fought for this, built this, from 17 years of silence and 6 months of showing up and the daily decision to believe that broken things can be mended. Harold was right. Men like Gerald don't change easily. But sometimes, when the stakes are high enough and the reason is compelling enough, they do the impossible work of becoming someone new. And Constance was right too. William never stopped loving me, even when he was angry. Even when he felt betrayed. The foundation we'd built over 17 years was strong enough to weather the earthquake of truth. I learned something through all of this. Motherhood is about holding on and letting go in equal measure. It's about being the foundation while encouraging them to build higher than you ever could. It's about raising children brave enough to forgive your mistakes while showing them it's okay to make their own. And second chances? They're not about pretending the past didn't happen. They're about deciding that the person who hurt you has done enough work to earn a different future. Gerald earned it. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of showing up when it would have been easier to disappear. So no, this story doesn't end with a wedding or a perfect family photo or a guarantee that everything will always be okay. It ends with this. He didn't know he had a son. I didn't know I still had a heart capable of risking love again. Now we're learning what it means to become a family, not the way we should have been, but the way we actually are. Broken, rebuilding, trying, one choice at a time. And that's enough. What did you think? Drop a comment below. And if this story made you feel something, hope, heartbreak, or something in between, subscribe for more stories about real love, real forgiveness, and real second chances. See you in the next one.